The morning sun had barely kissed the edges of the school building when Marcus Jenkins pushed open the back door of Westridge High. The old hinges creaked just like they did every morning at 6:15 a.m. sharp. With a mop in one hand and a janitor's cart rolling beside him, Marcus made his way down the quiet, echoing halls of the school he had walked through for over 20 years. To most, he was invisible, a passing shadow with silver in his beard and wear in his knees, a silent figure whose job was to make the floors shine and the trash disappear before the first bell rang. To the students, he was Mr. Jenkins only when someone needed help lifting a desk or unclogging a toilet. The rest of the time, he was just the janitor. But Marcus, he remembered everything. Every equation on every board, every lecture he overheard through cracked classroom doors, every whisper about him that students thought he couldn't hear. And more than anything, he remembered the life he almost had, the dream that once burned brightly in him like a fire, to become a mathematician. Room 212, Advanced Calculus. The door was ajar. Marcus peeked in to see Mr. Reynolds' class already underway. Mr. Reynolds stood at the front of the room, sharp in his pressed shirt and navy tie, his golden watch glinting under the fluorescent light. His voice, loud and authoritative, echoed through the room as he scrolled an enormous problem across the blackboard. A string of variables and integrals stretched from one end to the other. The class groaned. Some rolled their eyes. Others buried their faces in notebooks. Marcus knew that expression, confusion wrapped in arrogance. It was the same look he'd seen on the faces of classmates back in his days at Stamford. He bent down to pick up a crumpled piece of paper near the classroom door. That's when Mr. Reynolds spotted him. "Mr. Jenkins," he said, loud enough to draw every eye in the room. "You've been hanging around my classroom for years. Surely by now you've picked up a thing or two about calculus." Laughter, snickers. A few chuckles slipped from the back row. Marcus straightened up slowly, still holding the paper. His eyes met Reynolds', calm but alert. "Why did you come show the class your skills?" Reynolds continued, smiling like a man offering a dog a trick. "Solve this for us. Show them what you've learned with your observational education." More laughter now, even louder. Marcus didn't flinch, but inside, something shifted. A flicker. A flare. He looked at the board. The problem wasn't child's play, no. It was tough, designed to stump even the best students in the class. An advanced integral problem involving multiple substitutions, tricky boundaries, and layered concepts. Reynolds was proud of it, clearly. You could see it in the way he stood with his arms folded, eyebrows raised. And then came the comment that tipped it over. "Come on, Mr. Jenkins," Reynolds said, mock serious. "Show these kids you're not just good with a mop. Maybe you are secretly a genius." The class erupted. It wasn't just a joke anymore. It was a moment, a public stage, an invitation to humiliation disguised as a game. Marcus stood in the doorway, the janitor's cart behind him, the laughter in front. He felt the sting of heat behind his eyes, a sensation he hadn't let rise in years. But he didn't blink, didn't look away, because Marcus Jenkins had once stood on a very different stage. He remembered it vividly, the lecture halls at Stanford, the rustle of notebooks, the way his professor once nodded in approval at a solution Marcus found faster than anyone else. He remembered walking into the math library like it was a temple, the smell of chalk dust, the power of solving something no one else could see through. And he remembered the way it was all taken from him, the injury, the call home, his father in the hospital, tuition unpaid, the look in the dean's eyes when Marcus said he had to leave. Family comes first, Marcus had said. But no one asked if his dreams did. Back in the classroom, the students were still laughing. Reynolds had turned his back to write something else on the board. Marcus took a slow breath. He stepped inside. The laughter softened. Eyes turned. Marcus walked to the front of the classroom. The air felt thick. Reynolds turned around, surprised to see him moving forward. "You want me to solve it?" Marcus asked, voice calm. If you think you can, Reynolds said, still smirking. Marcus set the paper on the desk beside him, reached for the chalk. The sound of the stick touching the board cut through the air like a blade. And in that moment, the laughter vanished. No one was prepared for what happened next. The classroom, once brimming with amused chatter, sank into an eerie silence. Every eye in the room followed Marcus Jenkins as he took slow, deliberate steps toward the blackboard. The janitor's uniform he wore no longer looked like a mark of labor, but like a cloak of quiet dignity. The air was still thick with the weight of a moment no one saw coming. Some students exchanged uncertain glances. Others leaned forward as if trying to read between the lines of this unfolding drama. Mr. Reynolds, arms now loosely crossed, watched with a blend of curiosity and smug disbelief. He was sure Marcus would hesitate, back down, falter. But Marcus's steps never wavered. The clatter of a pencil hitting the floor somewhere in the back echoed unnaturally loud. No one moved to pick it up. Marcus reached the board. With a hand that had gripped mops, buckets, and brooms for years, Marcus picked up the chalk, smooth and white, trembling slightly between his fingers. It had been decades since he held one with the purpose of solving anything more than life's quiet indignities. He stood still for a moment, eyes tracing over the symbols Mr. Reynolds had drawn. A complex, definite integral requiring multiple layers of understanding. For a second, the chalk hovered. Then Marcus wrote the first line. The room inhaled. His handwriting was neat, confident, too confident. Lines of substitution unfolded with speed and grace. He applied limits, transformed expressions, simplified. The symbols bent to his will, flowing as if they had waited years to return home to his hands. Gasps broke the silence. A student in the second row leaned toward his friend. Wait, isn't that the method Dr. Park used at the State University workshop? Another murmured, how does he know this? Each stroke of chalks seemed to echo off the walls. Marcus didn't write quickly, but precisely, like a man composing music, aware of every note, every rest, every crescendo. The numbers weren't just symbols. They were pieces of him, of a mind that had never dulled, only hidden beneath layers of time, labor, and silence. In that moment, Marcus wasn't solving a problem. He was revealing a history that no one had cared enough to ask about. Each line was a story. Each simplification was a truth being told. Marcus's face remained calm, focused. This was not a performance. It was a reunion with himself, with the young man he used to be before life rerouted his dreams. Each stroke on the board felt like a return to his essence. Each solved step was a reclaiming. At the back of the room, the class valedictorian, Ashley Chen, sat with furrowed brows, watching intently. She had spent 3 days trying to crack this exact problem. Seeing Marcus do it fluently and silently stunned her. Mr. Reynolds shifted his stance. His smirk had begun to falter, just lightly. Perhaps it was the precision, or the speed, or the dawning awareness that this man, this janitor, was solving a problem many of his top students had abandoned with frustration. Some students sat up straighter. One girl set down her phone. A boy who had been doodling in the margins of his notebook now stared, transfixed. You could feel it, that collective shift from ridicule to reverence. Marcus moved to the final step, a clean, concise simplification. He double-checked it silently, then underlined the answer. He stepped back, turned, and looked directly at Mr. Reynolds. No gloating, no arrogance, just quiet strength. This is the answer you were looking for, Marcus said, his voice firm, unwavering. No one spoke. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. Students stared not just at the board, but at the man who had, with a piece of chalk and a lifetime of buried brilliance, rewritten what they thought they knew about worth, identity, and intelligence. A few mouths hung open. Mr. Reynolds blinked. Marcus placed the chalk down on the tray with a soft clink. Then, without another word, He began walking toward the door. But something was different now. This time, every step he took echoed with power, not of status, but of truth finally seen. Behind him, the classroom was no longer full of students. It was full of witnesses, witnesses to a moment that had cracked open their world just enough to let something new shine through. Marcus's steps were not quick, but they were steady. As he passed by each row, students followed him with their eyes, silently reshaping the image they'd once held of the man they only knew as the janitor. As he reached the threshold, Marcus paused. He glanced over his shoulder, not to seek praise, but as if to say, "Remember this." And then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him. No one moved for several seconds. It was Ashley Chen who finally broke the silence. "That was beautiful," she whispered. And somehow, the word didn't sound strange at all. Mr. Reynolds turned toward the board, his eyes scanning Marcus's solution. He traced the steps with a quiet, tightening jaw, knowing what he saw was not just accurate, it was elegant. And for the first time in years, he felt like the student. The room buzzed faintly, not with mockery, but with the tremor of change. And outside, Marcus Jenkins walked back down the hallway, past rows of lockers and bulletin boards. Mop still parked in the corner of the next hallway. The echo of his footsteps faded into the morning noise. But in room 212, the silence still held. Because they hadn't just seen a janitor solve calculus. They had just watched a man reclaim the future that the world had once denied him, and that they would never forget. Marcus's footsteps were soft against the waxed floors, but the echo they left behind in room 212 was louder than any voice could be. As he turned the corner into the quieter west wing of the school, the hallway seemed to expand around him, not physically, but in presence. He was alone again, as he had been for decades, but it didn't feel the same. His hands, still trembling faintly, brushed against the metal handle of his janitor's cart. The weight of the mop seemed lighter now. Or maybe, for the first time in years, he wasn't carrying the burden of being unseen. He glanced at his reflection in the glass door of the faculty lounge as he passed. For a fleeting moment, he saw a younger version of himself looking back, shirt pressed, backpack full of textbooks, hope in his eyes. That version had wanted to change the world with math. And maybe, in a small way, he just had. Meanwhile, in room 212, the silence had stretched thin. Ashley Chen was still staring at the board. "Did anyone film that?" she whispered. No one had. No one thought they needed to. Mr. Reynolds walked to the front, his face unusually pale. He traced Marcus's solution with his eyes, his mouth slightly open as if trying to speak, but unsure of the language. Each line on the board was a reminder that knowledge isn't always tethered to status. That intellect doesn't announce itself with degrees or job titles. It simply is. One student finally broke the tension. "He's the janitor, right?" she said, her voice tentative, almost guilty. "Not anymore," another replied. "He's more than that." Reynolds slowly erased the board, every stroke of the eraser feeling like a quiet apology. And then, without turning to face the class, he said, "Class dismissed." But no one moved. Outside, Marcus had made it back to his supply room, the small, cluttered space that held the familiar scent of cleaning solutions and the quiet hum of the old heater. He sat down on the stool in the corner, his legs stiff, his breathing steady. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in 30 years, he let the tears fall, not from pain, not from humiliation, but from something far more complicated, release. He had carried silence like armor, but now it had cracked, and something beautiful had spilled out. A knock on the door startled him. He wiped his face and stood up, expecting a teacher needing a broken faucet fixed or a student with gum on their shoe. But when he opened the door, it wasn't either. It was Mr. Reynolds. The man looked smaller than usual, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes unsure. "Marcus," he began. It was the first time he'd said his name. Marcus didn't answer right away. He simply held the door open. Reynolds stepped inside, standing awkwardly among the bottles of bleach and old mop handles. "I wanted to say," Reynolds began, his voice hoarse, "that I was wrong. About you. About everything, really." Marcus nodded slowly. He wasn't surprised by the apology, but it didn't make it easier to hear. Years of quiet judgment don't disappear with one gesture. Reynolds looked down. "I don't know what you gave up, but I know what you gave us today." Marcus's eyes softened. "I didn't do it for you," he said. "I did it because sometimes silence becomes unbearable. And because that board, that was once my home." The teacher nodded, ashamed but listening. "I used to believe that if I stayed small, the world would leave me alone," Marcus continued. "But today I remembered that being invisible is not the same as being safe." They stood in silence for a moment, not awkward, but heavy. "Real. I'd like to invite you to speak to the class," Reynolds finally said. "Properly, not like this morning. As a guest. As someone they need to learn from." Marcus considered it. The idea of standing in front of a room again, not as a janitor, but as a teacher, even briefly, felt both healing and terrifying. "Maybe," he said, "but only if they're ready to listen with their whole hearts, not just their ears." Reynolds nodded. "I think they are." He reached out his hand, and Marcus shook it. Outside the small room, the school continued its usual rhythm. Bells rang, students shuffled, lockers slammed. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. And it had started with a man, a mop, and a piece of chalk. As Marcus walked back down the hallway after class, something subtle had shifted in the atmosphere of Westridge High. Teachers nodded to him, not with the brief, distracted acknowledgement of before, but with quiet admiration. A few even stopped him. "That was incredible," said Mrs. Patel, the English teacher, as she passed him near the faculty lounge. "You held those students in the palm of your hand. I've never seen them so focused." Marcus gave a soft smile. They just needed someone to speak to them differently. That afternoon, as he returned to his usual tasks, sweeping under staircases, emptying bins, students who once looked through him now looked at him. Some stopped him to ask questions about math. Others simply said hello. One student, Tyler, who had barely scraped by in algebra the year before, came up quietly while Marcus was dusting the windows near the science wing. "Mr. Jenkins," Tyler said nervously, tugging at his hoodie. "I didn't understand the method you used today, but it made me want to try. Like really try. That's never happened before." Marcus placed the rag down and turned to him. "That's the best thing anyone's said to me all week," he said. "Come by room 212 on Monday. We'll work on it together." Tyler's eyes lit up, and he hurried off, the weight on his shoulders suddenly lighter. Meanwhile, in the principal's office, a different conversation was taking place. Principal Hernandez sat behind her desk, watching the video feed from room 212 that Reynolds had recorded at Marcus' request. Not for exposure, but for record-keeping. Her eyes didn't blink as she watched him teach. Listen to the clarity and compassion in his voice. "He doesn't just teach math," she whispered. "He teaches presence." She closed the laptop and picked up the phone. "Get the school board on the line," she told her assistant. "I want to talk about creating something permanent." By the time Monday came around, room 212 was full 10 minutes before class officially started. Word had spread beyond the math students. Kids from other classes, other grades, even a couple of teachers found excuses to sit in. Marcus was ready. He had arrived early, chalk already lined neatly at the edge of the board, a few hand-drawn diagrams folded in his pocket. When he stepped up to the front, the chatter stopped. A new energy had taken root, respectful, engaged, eager. He didn't begin with formulas. He began with a story. "Math," he said, "isn't just about numbers. It's about patterns, structures, ways of thinking that help you make sense of the world. You don't need to be a genius to understand it. You just need curiosity and courage." He drew a spiral on the board. tying it into the Fibonacci sequence, then into the swirl of galaxies, the curl of ocean waves, the architecture of pine cones. A collective gasp rose from the room. "I want you to see," he said, "that this subject isn't confined to paper. It's everywhere. And it belongs to all of us." Tyler raised his hand. "But what if we've already decided we're bad at math?" Marcus smiled. "Then it's time to change the story you tell yourself." And slowly, lesson by lesson, he helped them do just that. By the third week, Marcus's sessions became standing room only. Students who once skipped class now arrived early. Teachers adjusted their schedules to sit in the back just to listen. The school counselor noted a measurable increase in student engagement and confidence. Principal Hernandez invited him for a meeting. "We want to offer you a part-time instructional role," she said. "Official, paid, with the freedom to design your own workshops." Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked out the window toward the courtyard, where students gathered in groups, books in hand, some even working through practice problems with chalk on the pavement. "I never wanted a title," he said, "but I'd like a chance to keep opening doors." "You've already opened so many," Hernandez replied. "Let's open more together." And just like that, the man once laughed at for holding a mop had become one of the most respected voices on campus. But Marcus stayed grounded. He still swept the halls in the early morning, still fixed jammed lockers, still smiled at every student who passed him, because he knew better than anyone that respect isn't earned through recognition. It's earned through consistency. And in that, Marcus Jenkins was unshakable. By the end of the month, Westridge High was no longer the same school. There was something alive in the halls now, something that hummed under conversations, flickered in glances, rooted itself deep in the floor tiles and locker doors. The students didn't just respect Marcus Jenkins, they were changed by him. You could see it in the way they listened in class, or in how they now held open doors for the cafeteria staff, how they spoke up when a classmate was mocked for struggling. Mr. Reynolds, once proud and untouchable, had softened. He stood at the back of Marcus's sessions, always quiet, always watching, like a student relearning the purpose of his own profession. Principal Hernandez, moved by the growing momentum, did something Westridge had never done before. She announced a school-wide assembly. It would take place Friday morning in the main auditorium. Classes would be paused, students and teachers required to attend. The theme: rewriting the narrative. Stories that change us. Marcus was invited to speak. At first, he declined. "I'm not a public speaker," he told Hernandez. "I'm not here for applause." "You're not here because of applause," she answered gently. "You're here because you told the truth, and this school is finally ready to listen." So Marcus agreed. Friday came fast. The auditorium filled slowly but buzzed with curiosity. Students clustered by grade level. Teachers sat to the sides. And even parents, invited for the first time, lined the back row. News of Marcus's story had reached beyond school walls, pulling attention from local media and the district board. There was even a camera crew. Marcus had tried to object, but Hernandez assured him, "We're not broadcasting it live, but your story belongs to more than just this school now." As the lights dimmed, Hernandez stepped onto the stage. Her voice echoed steady and warm. "Today we celebrate a man who reminded us that greatness doesn't wear a name tag or come with a title. It walks quietly, works hard, and speaks truth when it matters most. Please welcome Mr. Marcus Jenkins." The auditorium erupted, not with thunderous cheers, but something more powerful, a rising wave of heartfelt applause echoing respect. Marcus stepped onto the stage slowly, his dark blazer neat, his shoulders proud. He stood in the spotlight not as a janitor, not even as a teacher, but as a man who had shaken a school into awakening. He gripped the microphone, looked out over the crowd, then he began. "I was born in a small town," he said. "Grew up where the sun beat harder than the world ever did. My mother scrubbed floors, my father built homes. I learned early that work didn't care if it was pretty. It only cared if it got done. He paused. Students leaned in. I loved math because it made sense when the world didn't. Equations didn't care what color your skin was. They didn't laugh at your clothes or ask what car your father drove. They just asked you to see. A murmur of agreement rippled across the room. I'd earned my place at Stanford, but life had other lessons. My family needed me, and I walked away from a future people thought I deserved. I didn't stop learning, but I stopped being seen. He let the silence hold. For 30 years, I mopped floors and emptied trash. People walked past me with headphones in. Some even made jokes. None of that bothered me as much as the fact that I started believing them. I started thinking maybe that was all I was. The auditorium was still. And then one day, someone made a joke in class. A joke about me, about my job. And for once, I didn't let it pass. He smiled gently. I picked up the chalk, and I wrote back. Laughter bubbled through the audience. Not mocking, moved. I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it because truth has a strange way of surviving. It waits quietly inside us, sometimes for years. But when the moment comes, it rises. Marcus looked around. I see so many faces here. I see students who thought they weren't smart enough. Teachers who forgot why they started. I see a community waking up to each other. He paused, then looked straight into the camera at the back. To anyone watching this who feels invisible, you are not. Your worth is not measured by how others see you. It's measured by how you live, what you choose, what you rise for. A long silence followed. Then applause broke out. This time it was thunderous. Some stood, some cried. Ashley Chen had tears streaming down her cheeks. In the back, Mr. Reynolds clapped with both hands, his eyes damp. Afterward, students swarmed the lobby. Parents thanked Marcus. Teachers hugged him. Even the school superintendent shook his hand with reverence. And in a quiet corner of the auditorium, Tyler waited patiently. When Marcus reached him, the boy didn't speak. He just pulled a folded piece of paper from his backpack and handed it over. It was a math test. At the top, in red ink, was a bold, underlined. Tyler looked up. I never thought I'd see that letter next to my name. You didn't just earn it, Marcus said. You became it. Later that night, Marcus returned home to his modest apartment. He sat in his worn chair, the one with the loose armrest. He took off his shoes, poured himself tea, and opened a notebook. On the first page, he wrote, "Today I taught more than math." He looked at the page for a long time, then closed it gently. Outside, the night was quiet. But inside Marcus Jenkins, the world had changed forever. And it had only just begun. The Monday after the assembly felt different, not just because of the buzz that still lingered in the air, but because Marcus Jenkins was no longer simply a quiet presence in the halls. He was now a name etched into Westridge's culture. He had become, in the students' words, our Mr. Jenkins. But beyond the classroom, the world was beginning to knock. Emails poured into the school's front office. Former students wrote in, recalling how they had seen Marcus cleaning the halls years ago and never realized who he really was. Teachers from other districts reached out, asking for copies of the assembly speech. Local news stations requested interviews. The story of the janitor turned teacher had become more than a school anecdote. It had become a movement. At first, Marcus ignored the attention. He continued arriving early, sweeping the halls, preparing room 212 for another day of learning. He still preferred quiet conversations in the corners of classrooms to headlines or hashtags. But the world outside Westridge had taken notice, and its voice was getting louder. One afternoon, Principal Hernandez sat across from Marcus in her office, papers stacked between them. "We've been invited," she said, her voice almost in disbelief. "You and I, to speak at the State Educator Summit. They want you to open the first day." Keynote speaker. Marcus's eyebrows lifted. "I'm not sure I belong on a stage like that. Hernandez leaned forward. Marcus, you don't belong on that stage because of the chalk or the mop. You belong because you reminded us what education is for. He sat quietly for a moment, the hum of the radiator filling the space. I'll do it, he said. But only if we bring students with us. That Friday, Ashley Chen, Tyler, and Michael Rodriguez piled into a district van with Marcus and Principal Hernandez. They wore Westridge High pins on their shirts and carried a presentation titled, What We Learned When We Started Listening. At the conference center, they walked past rows of professionals in suits and name tags, into a room with over 1,000 seats. The walls were lined with banners celebrating innovation in education. It all felt polished, official. Backstage, Marcus held a stack of note cards, but he didn't look at them. He stood with his hands behind his back, breathing steadily. Ashley approached him, nervous. He smiled. Remember, just quiet inside. It's like standing before a big problem on a blank board. You know you'll write something. You just don't know how it'll land. When his name was announced, the room rose in a standing ovation before he even spoke. He walked to the podium, paused, then turned away from the mic. I'd like to begin differently, he said, and motioned to the side curtain. I'd like my students to stand with me. Gasps rippled as Ashley, Tyler, and Michael joined him. Together, they told the story. Marcus shared his past. Ashley spoke of how she used to measure intelligence only by test scores, until she saw humility solve the hardest problem in class. Tyler told the audience he'd been failing for 3 years, but the day Marcus solved the board problem, something cracked open. Michael spoke of how his father, after seeing the assembly clip, cried for the first time in front of him. By the time they finished, there were tears in the crowd. Superintendents stood. Policy directors wiped their eyes. One school principal from another city whispered, "We need a Marcus Jenkins at every school." When they stepped down, the applause didn't stop for nearly 5 full minutes. Afterward, educators lined up to shake Marcus's hand. One woman whispered, "You didn't just change a school. You reminded us why we teach." Another said, "I want to take your story back to my staff. It's the first time I felt hopeful in years." Marcus didn't stay for the reception. Instead, he walked out onto the balcony overlooking the city skyline, the sunset casting a long shadow behind him. Ashley joined him, followed by the boys. "Did we do okay?" Tyler asked. "You did more than okay," Marcus said. "You made them see." The next morning, articles began appearing online. The Janitor Who Redefined Genius. Westridge High's Unlikely Revolution. How one man and a piece of chalk changed everything. Marcus's inbox filled with invitations from universities, community centers, nonprofits, educators across the country, even the Department of Education. He declined most of them, not because he didn't appreciate them, but because he understood something deeper now. His impact was strongest when it was personal, when it was rooted. And for Marcus, that place was still Westridge. But one letter stood out. It came from the National Forum on Educational Equity, a handwritten note, elegant in its simplicity. "Mr. Jenkins, we believe that systems change begins with stories like yours. Would you consider joining our council as a community advisor? We are developing a national initiative to address classroom bias, and we believe your perspective is not just valuable, it's essential." Marcus read it twice, then a third time. That night, he sat in his kitchen, pen in hand, drafting his response. "Yes," he wrote simply, "but only if students are part of every conversation." The letter was mailed out the next morning. Back at Westridge, Marcus resumed his role in room 212. Students kept showing up early. Some from other schools asked to sit in. Teachers sent their lesson plans for review. Parents stopped him at the grocery store to say thank you. And every so often, Marcus would walk past a hallway window, pause, and look outside. He saw them differently now, not because he had changed, but because they had. He was no longer just the janitor. He was a mirror, reflecting back the truth that had always been there. That greatness often comes dressed in overalls. That wisdom doesn't always speak first, but when it does, the world listens. And that when one person rises quietly and bravely, they carry an entire community with them. Spring arrived early at Westridge High, and with it came a surge of activity. Standardized testing, college applications, award ceremonies. It was the time of year where everything seemed to accelerate. But for room 212, things had already changed months ago. Marcus Jenkins's name had become synonymous with a deeper kind of learning, one that couldn't be measured by state rubrics or national benchmarks. Still, tests were coming. Students shuffled into room 212 one Wednesday morning, shoulders tense, eyes scanning the folders stacked at the front of the room. Even Ashley looked uneasy. Tyler, who now showed up 15 minutes early every day, bit his lip as he sat down. The room was quieter than usual. Marcus stood at the front, holding nothing but a single piece of chalk. "I know you're all nervous," he said, writing 3 words on the board in big letters: value, fear, worth. He turned around. "These words don't belong on a test, but they're the ones we let define us when tests come around." A few heads lifted. I've seen the smartest students sabotage themselves because they let fear decide their worth. And I've seen others, those who've always been underestimated, rise, not because of confidence, but because they refused to let fear win. He stepped closer to the class. "These tests do not measure your intelligence. They do not measure your soul. They only measure your familiarity with a system that was not designed for everyone to win. So today, you will take these tests, but I want you to walk in knowing your value has never depended on your scores." Silence. Then a few nods. Ashley exhaled deeply. Michael cracked his knuckles and grinned. Tyler sat up a little taller. After the students filed out for their official exam rooms, Marcus stayed behind, alone in room 212. He looked at the board. The chalk words hung there like a quiet shield. He didn't erase them. Later that day, Marcus was called into Principal Hernandez's office. She looked tense. "Marcus," she began carefully, "I received a complaint." His brow furrowed. "A complaint?" She nodded. "From a parent. They said you told students the test doesn't matter, that it's biased, that you're encouraging them not to take it seriously." Marcus folded his arms, eyes steady. "I told them the test doesn't define their worth. That's not the same thing." "I know," Hernandez replied. "But the parent has already escalated it to the district. And someone from the board is coming to observe your class tomorrow." A long silence passed. "They think you're becoming too influential," she added quietly. Marcus didn't flinch. But inside, a familiar heat rose. One he hadn't felt since the day he picked up that piece of chalk. That night, Westridge's community Facebook page exploded. Some posts hailed Marcus as a hero. Others accused him of pushing an agenda and undermining academic standards. By morning, 3 reporters waited outside the school. When Marcus entered room 212, the usual early buzz was missing. Students looked nervous. Ashley avoided eye contact. Tyler sat stiff, his backpack hugged to his chest. Marcus looked at them all, then spoke slowly. "We don't run from truth here. We don't hide because people are uncomfortable. We face it." He picked up the chalk and underlined the word worth. Then the door opened. A woman with a clipboard stepped in, district emblem on her jacket. "Mr. Jenkins," she said formally, "I'm here to observe." He nodded, inviting her in with a small gesture. The students watched the interaction like an orchestra awaiting its conductor's cue. But Marcus didn't change. He taught the lesson. He asked questions. He encouraged mistakes. He told Tyler when he got one wrong, "That error is beautiful. It shows your thinking." By the end of class, the students weren't just engaged. They were alive with thought. The observer stood to leave. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Jenkins," she said, but her voice had softened. Later, she would write in her report, "Mr. Jenkins challenges conventional instruction with compassion and clarity. His classroom is one of the most intellectually and emotionally safe spaces I've observed. He is not a risk to education. He is its renewal." That same afternoon, Ashley left a note on his desk. "You told us the truth when no one else would. Don't ever stop." That night, Marcus walked the halls again, but this time he wasn't burdened. He carried something else entirely: conviction. The world could question him. The system could resist. But the truth, it would keep rising. 3 weeks passed. The school buzzed with spring energy. Seniors wore college sweaters with pride. Juniors whispered nervously about SATs. And room 212 remained the soul of Westridge. But under the surface, something colder stirred. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, Principal Hernandez called Marcus into her office again. This time, she didn't smile. "They scheduled a board meeting," she said quietly. "Next Monday night. They're reviewing complaints, and they're bringing your employment under review." Marcus blinked. "They want to fire me." She hesitated. "They're calling it a personnel evaluation, but yes. Some board members believe your influence has become disruptive." Marcus leaned back, letting the silence press in. He had always known his truth would make waves, but now those waves were threatening to pull him under. "They want you to speak," Hernandez continued. "Defend yourself. You'll have 5 minutes. To summarize a lifetime." That weekend, Westridge fractured. News of the hearing broke across social media. Debates erupted online and in person. Some parents launched a petition defending Marcus. Within 24 hours, it had 4,000 signatures. Others called him dangerous, unqualified, an activist in disguise. The local paper ran a headline: "Beloved Janitor or Political Provocateur?" Ashley, outraged, organized a rally. "We're not letting them erase him," she said. Tyler helped design posters. Michael got approval to live-stream the board meeting. Students met in the library, designing signs, rehearsing speeches. Some teachers joined quietly. Others stayed silent. Marcus watched it unfold without fanfare. He kept teaching. He kept sweeping the hallways at 6 a.m. He didn't mention the meeting. But every time a student passed him, they nodded a little deeper. When Monday arrived, the air in Westridge was electric. The board meeting was held in the district auditorium. Every seat was taken. Hundreds more stood in the aisles. Reporters lined the back wall. The school superintendent sat with folded arms. And Marcus, in his worn blazer, sat near the front, calm, unreadable. The meeting began. The board chair, a gray-haired man named Whitlock, tapped the mic. "We're here today to address concerns regarding Mr. Marcus Jenkins, currently listed as Westridge High School's janitorial staff, but performing classroom instructional duties without formal certification." Whispers broke out. Some gasped. Marcus didn't move. Whitlock continued. "We'll now hear from Mr. Jenkins. You have 5 minutes." Marcus stood. The auditorium fell into silence. He walked to the podium. Steady. "No paper. No notes. I was never hired to teach," he began. "But I never stopped being a teacher." His voice carried through the room like a tide. "I cleaned your floors. I emptied your trash. And I listened when no one else did. I watched kids fall through cracks no test could measure. I heard potential in every sigh, every silence." He looked at the board. "Yes, I taught in a classroom without permission, without pay, without a title. But I taught truth. And if that truth threatens you, maybe it's not me who needs review." The room erupted, but Marcus raised a hand. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to say, if the price of honesty is a job, then I'll pay it. But don't ask me to be silent again. I've already given too many years to silence." He stepped back. A beat of stillness. Then Ashley stood. "I am a straighter student," she said loudly. "And I never felt smart until Mr. Jenkins spoke to me." Tyler stood. "He saved my education." Michael stood. He saved my father. One by one, students rose, then parents, then a teacher, until nearly half the room stood in a wave of testimony. The board whispered urgently among themselves. Finally, Whitlock tapped the mic. We appreciate the feedback. We will deliberate privately and release our decision by the end of the week. Boos, applause, shouts, flashing cameras. But Marcus simply nodded and left the stage. That night, he sat in the dark of room 212, alone. He did not know what the board would decide, but he knew who he was. And this time, he would not disappear quietly. Friday arrived like a storm without lightning, quiet but charged. All week, the school had waited, breath held, hearts clenched. Teachers whispered in the break rooms. Students checked their phones between classes. Even the janitorial closet, once Marcus's humble sanctuary, felt more like a war room. At exactly 2:30 p.m., Principal Hernandez called an emergency staff meeting in the auditorium. Students weren't invited, but they gathered anyway, pressing against windows, holding each other's hands. Journalists hovered just outside school property. Inside the auditorium, Marcus stood in the wings, arms folded across his chest. He had not changed his posture all week, not for cameras, not for rumors, not even when anonymous messages flooded his inbox, some praising, some threatening. The school board entered, accompanied by the superintendent. Hernandez stood at the podium, flanked by Mr. Reynolds and the vice principal. Thank you for gathering on such short notice, she began, her voice taut. The district board has concluded their deliberation. A pause. Whitlock stepped forward. After reviewing Mr. Marcus Jenkins' role and the concerns raised, the board has determined that Mr. Jenkins has acted outside the scope of his employment contract. Therefore, effective immediately, he will be dismissed from Westridge High School. Gasps. One teacher dropped her clipboard. A student screamed from behind the glass door. But Marcus didn't flinch. Whitlock cleared his throat. While Mr. Jenkins' intentions may have been noble, the board must uphold the integrity of the educational system and protect legal boundaries. The auditorium shook, not from an earthquake, but from rage. Hernandez stepped back up. I want it on record that I do not support this decision, she said firmly, her eyes locked on the board. If we punish those who uplift our children, what kind of system are we protecting? She turned to Marcus, her voice softening. I'm sorry. He nodded. Don't be. By the time Marcus stepped outside, students were already gathering in the parking lot. Word had spread like fire. Hundreds of them. Signs, tears, microphones, and chants. We are Marcus. Truth is not a threat. Hernandez followed Marcus out. Then she did something no one expected. She handed in her resignation, on live television. I will not lead a school that punishes justice, she said into the mic. I would rather stand with a man who cleans floors and opens minds than sit with those who only follow rules. The crowd exploded. What began as a protest became a movement. By nightfall, videos of the rally were viral. National news anchors debated Marcus's story. Civil rights organizations reached out. Teachers from across the country posted photos of their chalkboards reading, "Inspired by Jenkins." Marcus didn't speak publicly that night. He returned home, sat at his kitchen table, and opened a letter he had left unopened all week. It was from a small-town school district in Georgia, the one where he grew up. They had heard of his story. They wanted to offer him a position, but not as a janitor, as their new director of equity and learning. He smiled, tired but full. His time at Westridge had ended, but his purpose had only just begun. The air in Georgia was warmer, thicker. It wrapped around Marcus Jenkins like a memory come alive. The school wasn't grand. It didn't have Westridge's glass walls or sprawling campus. But it had something else, something he recognized the moment he walked through the front gate. Eyes watching, quietly questioning, hopeful, and afraid all at once. He'd been here before, not this school, not this building, but this feeling. He was once the boy with the hand-me-down shoes and the secret talent for numbers. And now he was back. Older, maybe wiser and ready. Marcus stepped into the small administrative office, where a plaque bearing his name had just been mounted on the wall. Marcus Jenkins, Director of Equity and Learning. The receptionist, a young woman named Marie, looked up and smiled nervously. "They've been talking about you since the board announced the hire," she said. "We've never had a position like this before." He nodded. "We'll figure it out together." Later that morning, he stood before a dozen skeptical faculty members in a small library repurposed as a meeting room. Some were veterans of 20 years or more. Others were new hires, still unsure how to carry a classroom. They weren't hostile, but they weren't welcoming either. "We've seen the videos," one said. "The protests, the speeches. Are you here to change our curriculum?" "No," Marcus said simply. "I'm here to change how we see each other." A pause. Some raised eyebrows. He continued. "Equity doesn't mean lowering standards. It means making sure everyone can reach them, especially the students we don't talk about enough. The quiet ones, the angry ones, the ones who've already given up." That landed differently. Over the next week, Marcus visited every classroom, not to supervise, but to observe. He watched a student get ignored because she didn't raise her hand fast enough. He saw another shut down by a careless joke about her accent. He wrote notes, but never judged. Then he met with each teacher, one by one, not to criticize, but to ask, "What do you need that you're not getting?" In the background, Westridge was still burning. The student protests had grown. Hernandez's resignation sparked waves across the district. Other schools began re-examining their discipline policies, student support, and even how they hired. One night, Marcus sat on a panel hosted by a national education nonprofit. The moderator asked, "What do you say to those who believe you've become a symbol, not a solution?" Marcus paused, then said, "Symbols don't scare me. Silence does." Applause. Cameras. Headlines. But the next morning, Marcus was back in a fourth-period algebra class in Georgia, helping a boy named Devin relearn fractions. Because real change wasn't about moments. It was about showing up. Again and again and again. 2 months in, the school's suspension rates had dropped by 27%. Attendance rose. A new student-led council on equity was launched, and the principal gave Marcus a permanent seat at the table. One day, as he walked across the courtyard, he heard his name. It was Ashley. She had come to visit. "You didn't think I'd just let the story end like that, did you?" she said, grinning. She was touring colleges in the South and made the detour. "I'm applying to be a teacher," she added. "Math, of course." Marcus didn't respond at first. He just looked at her, this brilliant, once invisible girl who had found her voice, and smiled. "Looks like you'll be taking my job soon," he joked. Ashley laughed. "No, Mr. Jenkins. I'll be starting my own room 212. They stood in silence a moment longer beneath the Georgia sun. Marcus looked around. The cracked pavement, the chatter of students, the distant ring of a bell. It wasn't Westridge, but it was the beginning again. And sometimes, starting over wasn't a step back. It was the first step forward. Years later, long after the cameras dimmed and the protests faded into school archives, Marcus Jenkins stood once more in front of a chalkboard, not in a classroom, but in a museum. The National Museum of American Education had dedicated a wing to voices that changed the system. On one wall, mounted beneath soft light, was a simple, worn slate with the equation Marcus had once solved in room 212, the one that had begun it all. Next to it, in elegant print, read, "This is the answer you were looking for." Marcus Jenkins, 2025. He watched from the side as a group of young students passed by, pausing to read the quote. One girl, maybe 12, asked her teacher, Was he really a janitor? The teacher nodded. He was, and a lot more. Marcus smiled quietly and stepped away. He didn't need to be recognized. He never had. Because somewhere in another school, another Ashley was raising her hand. Somewhere, a boy like Tyler was picking up a pencil again. And somewhere, a teacher, new or weary or nearly broken, was remembering that sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. The board had long been erased, but the chalk line remained, not on walls, but in hearts, forever.